I am going to open my script. Here it is, the lighting controller. And we're going to come right down here. Your script should look a lot like mine, hopefully very similar to mine, because we left them off in the same place. If you're thinking about it, what we left off with was we were merely telling the lights what to do. It's now time for us to hear back from the lights. So in the previous video, we actually talked about TCP socket library. And we talked about the fact that a TCP socket library has several methods, right? Things it can do. It has several properties, things that are true about it. And we said that there also is the event handler, which is all of the things that can happen to a TCP socket. And here it is again, because I'm quite sure that you have slept and forgotten. One of the events that can happen to the TCP socket is that it can be connected. And specifically what this means is that we picked up the phone and the other end answered. They also picked up the phone. So when the other end, right, and so sometimes it's useful to use the terms server and client. I would be the client. I'm picking up the phone and I'm dialing into the server. When the server also picks up, then the connection has been made. And so we get the dot connected event. In the event of a reconnection, then we would get reconnect. When the server talks to me, that's going to show up as data in my buffer. If the far end hangs up on me, then I will receive the dot closed event. If there's an error, we get an event. If there's a timeout, we get an event. This is typical of what's going on. All right, now that we have seen this slide, let's go back and start trying to write some code. We are going to make use of VS Code to help us here. We are going to start by typing TC, and that's enough. You should see that there are 4 things that have popped up. TCP socket, which we've used, TCP socket server, that's something else. We're not going to use it today. And then we have 2 options. We have discrete event handlers and then event handler. Let's particularly choose the event handler because it's going to help us write our code that we need as we move forward. Hit Tab. And when you do, you will notice, well, look at that. It actually wrote several lines of code for me. Also notice on my line 69 that it has highlighted the word socket. The reason that it has highlighted the word socket is that we asked VS Code to create a TCP socket event handler, which it did, and now it's prompting us to say, okay, but which socket do you want this to be the event handler for? Nate, do you remember what is the name of our TCP socket?
Well, mine's on line 56 and it's called Nate Lights, all caps. Yours looks like it's on line 51 called Dev Lights.
Dev Lights, exactly. We are going to name it, right, I'm going to name mine, of course, Dev Lights. And Nate is correct to point out that on my line 51 is where I established Dev Lights as our TCP socket. The other thing you should think about is you could open more than one TCP socket in your script. There's really no limit practically. I mean, it's kind of strange to do more than one in most cases. In most cases, you're only going to do it once, but logically, there's no limit to how many that you could do. And so it is really important that you make sure that you connect those dots. The next thing that I think we ought to do is we ought to see what's happening on our TCP socket. And the easiest way for us to do that would be to add some print statements to each of these fields. So inside, see how we have the if and else if and else if and else if? In each one of those little slots, let's come in and just put a little print statement. I'm going to put in print dev lights is, and in this first case, connected. And then I'm going to copy and paste into each of the rest of those conditions. And I'm going to update each of those little print statements appropriately so that we can get some insight into what is happening on our TCP socket. All right, let's hit save and let's hit go and let's see what happens. Mine, of course, is prompting me to enter some IP information because I left my file without an IP address. So let's go straighten that out real quick. 127.0.0.1 is for me. And now in my debug window, I can read that func established connection attempted with my stuff, and that's fine. And then I got some information. It says DevLights is connected and DevLights got data. And if we watch this thing for a minute, we'll see that something happens. And in fact, I'm going to tell a little bit of an embarrassing story. So back in middle school, you may remember, if you can remember back that far, we used to have telephones that were wired to a base, and the base was wired into the wall. And we would go still to our friend's house and spend the night. And so there we were. It was a Friday evening. Football game was over. We went home, and it was getting a little late in the evening. And so we all sort of decided, you know what it'd be good to do? We should call that girl and try to talk to one of the pretty girls in our middle school, because we were right on that real interesting age of when girls became a thing for young boys. And so we'd pick up the phone and we'd dial, and the phone would ring, and then she would answer. And then we would have this immediate conversation where we would just blurt out all kinds of information, and then you would hear on the other side, are you there? Hello? Okay, well, bye, and then hang up the phone. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I called her. I thought I had a whole conversation, but it was only in my head, and she hung up the phone on me. I now need to call her back immediately and tell her that I'm not a weirdo that just called her and didn't say anything. And so actually, if you're watching your debug through all of that really terrible story, you'll see that that play is actually playing out in your debug window as we speak. Connected means I picked up the phone, I called her, and she answered. Data is her saying hello, and then if you notice, 60 seconds later, because I didn't say anything at all, click, she hung up on me. That was so scary. And so anyway,
I mean, I'm just gonna recommend to not use your TCP socket for quite such stalker-ish activity in the future.
I wasn't being a stalker.
If she hangs up, that's the answer, man. That's it. You're done. You don't call back. She's giving you an answer, Jeff.
Hard being a teenager. Anyway, let's move on. It is important for you to know what your TCP socket is doing and why it is doing it. This is the natural rhythm of TCP socket communications. So if yours is doing that, it means everything is working exactly the way it's supposed to. There's nothing wrong. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to. But let's see if we can actually hear from our lighting device. Well, Nate, which of these 6 little sub-events is where she might be saying hello to me?
That's got some data. She's giving you some information.
Exactly.
She said, "Hey, this is how much my lights are on right now."
Exactly. Let's come into this the little data spot here. For me, about line 77-ish or so. And let's create a little variable. And we're going to call it temp string removed from buffer, which of course is very elaborate. That is such a long name. But there's a reason I've named it this, and it's because this is exactly what we're about to do. We are about to remove data from the buffer. And once we remove it from the buffer, it won't be there anymore. And that should be in keeping with your expectations if you've ever worked with buffers in other times and places, other languages, etc. This is pretty typical behavior, and this is exactly what's going on here. So we're going to do what's called a read line from our buffer, and we're going to extract information. You may recall that when we talked to the lights, we sent a whole bunch of string and then a \r. When our lights talk back to us, it's going to talk back to us with a whole bunch of string and then a \r. That's our end of line character. So we are going to assign to temp string removed from buffer the output of the following method. And it's just a syntactical mouthful, and I can't make it any simpler. I'm sorry. Here we go. We're going to use the method for dev lights. The method is called read line, capital R, capital L. You may remember that from the slides from the previous videos, but here we are. We're going to use it here. And the syntax, right, the argument that we stick in, this is it, okay? I can't make it simpler. It's just a little bit wordy. We are going to read to the TCP socket.eol.custom, and then we're going to tell it, comma, the string \r. I know, it's a mouthful. But let's see if that actually worked. Nate, how might I actually see if that actually worked?
Print it out.
Print it out.
Just like you do with the girls. You print out your message and you stand outside their place and you hold it above your head. When they ignore you for so long, that's the least creepy thing.
Exactly, right. But you see, where I thought you were going to go with printing out was to that other delightful movie from the 80s called Weird Science. Where
we're not 3D printing.
Printed out.
We're not 3D printing people here. That's definitely illegal.
Not yet.
That movie has not aged well.
It really hasn't. Anyway, all right, let's print out temp string removed from buffer. Hit save and see what you got. Look at that. We have a very kind lighting system. It is indeed talking back to us. Mine says, welcome to the Really Good Lights 2000 on TCP port 5103. Let's actually see what else our lighting system tells us, because you may recall that our API is a little sparse on information. It really has just given the bare bones of, like, you can talk to it like this. You should expect some other messages. You should expect LVL at XX kinds of messages. And here we are. We've already seen something unexpected. We got a welcome message. That's okay. Let's recall a preset or move your fader. It really doesn't matter. And let's see what else can come in through our script. Oh, awesome. There we are. We are getting feedback. Notice what it's doing. It's talking back to us. And so we are getting feedback. The lights are talking to us.